Aariz Khan thought he had found the perfect wife. Nadira Feroz appeared elegant, mysterious, and admired by everyone at their wedding in Bengaluru. But within 24 hours, the dream collapsed into horror. What began as a union filled with celebration turned into a brutal crime scene, exposing secrets that stretched across countries. Inspector Veeraj Malhotra uncovered forged identities, Sana Illyas revealed shocking medical truths, and Rehan Dastoor's silence became the missing piece in a tragedy that spiraled out of control. This was not just a marriage gone wrong, it was a web of lies, violence and betrayal that stunned an entire city. The wedding of Aariz Khan and Nadira Feroz in Bengaluru was unlike any other. The Khan family, known for their respected status in the community, had spared no expense in celebrating the occasion. Guests poured in from across the city, dressed in shimmering outfits, while musicians played traditional melodies that echoed through the decorated hall. The bride had flown in from Malaysia, and her arrival added an air of fascination to the event. Nadira, wrapped in a richly embroidered dress, looked graceful and carried herself with quiet dignity. People whispered about her beauty and her poise, wondering how Aariz had found such a rare match. To the neighbors and relatives, this marriage seemed to be the beginning of a perfect chapter in both of their lives. Aariz stood proudly beside her, his smile wide and confident. For months he had heard relatives comment on how lucky he was to be marrying someone so cultured and elegant. Nadira barely spoke during the ceremonies, her words soft and brief, but her silence was mistaken for shyness. The few times she looked up, her dark eyes seemed to hold secrets that no one could guess. Still, to an outsider it appeared to be nothing more than the nerves of a new bride in an unfamiliar city. As the rituals continued, small details began to stand out, though at first, no one paid them much attention. When relatives asked Nadira about her parents or her childhood in Malaysia, her answers were vague and rehearsed. She smiled politely but always shifted the topic away from herself. The guests, swept away by the glamour of the evening, brushed off these inconsistencies. Only Aariz's cousin Rehan noticed her unease more than once. She kept her distance from the crowd, stepping aside whenever the music grew louder or the lights shone too brightly on her face. The celebration stretched into the night. Food was served in abundance, the air thick with the aroma of biryani and kebabs. Families posed for photographs, children laughed, and the hall sparkled with lights that made everything seem enchanted. In the center of it all, Nadira sat quietly, her expression difficult to read. Some of the older women commented on how polite and well-mannered she seemed, calling her the perfect daughter-in-law. Aariz himself felt pride in being the center of admiration, his confidence swelling with every congratulation he received. But beneath the surface, cracks were forming that no one could yet see. Nadira's hands trembled slightly whenever she held a glass of water, her eyes darting nervously whenever someone asked too many questions. She seemed overly careful about her appearance, adjusting her dress repeatedly as if afraid of being scrutinized too closely. At one point she disappeared from the hall for several minutes, claiming she needed a moment to rest, leaving Aariz to answer questions from curious guests about her family. He brushed it off casually, saying her relatives were busy with work in Malaysia, but the unease in his voice was subtle and real. By midnight, the crowd had thinned, leaving only close family behind. The laughter softened, the music faded, and the grand hall slowly emptied. Nadira and Aariz finally left for the Khan household, a modest but well-respected home in Bengaluru. On the ride back, Nadira stared out of the window, her face illuminated briefly by the passing streetlight. Aariz noticed her silence but thought it was the natural anxiety of a woman entering a new life far from her homeland. What he did not realize was that her thoughts were elsewhere, weighed down by secrets she had carried across border. When they reached home, the family gathered to welcome her properly. She stepped into the house with hesitant steps, placing her foot over the threshold with the grace of a bride, but her face betrayed a flicker of hesitation that no one else seemed to catch. Relatives handed her gifts, jewelry, and words of blessing. She accepted them with quiet nods, all the while avoiding extended conversations. In the privacy of her room later, when the guests were gone and silence returned, Nadira finally exhaled as if she had been holding her breath all evening. To the Khan family, The day had ended with triumph and joy. To the neighbors, the marriage was the highlight of the week, a union between a respected groom and a mysterious bride from another land. But behind Nadira's soft smile and graceful presence, there lay unanswered questions and layers of hidden truth. The wedding had seemed perfect on the outside, yet its foundation was built on fragile secrets that were waiting for the right moment to shatter. The first night in the Khan household carried an air of tension that no one expected. The family, still basking in the glow of the wedding festivities, assumed that the new couple needed privacy to begin their life together. They retreated to their rooms, leaving Aariz and Nadira alone in the quiet house. For Aariz, the day had been overwhelming but satisfying. He had stood proudly before his relatives, admired for securing a wife who appeared elegant and mysterious. As he entered his room, decorated with flowers and scented candles arranged by his sisters, he felt the weight of responsibility and the excitement of what lay ahead. Nadira, however, appeared more uneasy than joyful. Her smile was thin, her movements stiff, and her eyes restless as she adjusted the folds of her dress again and again. Aariz tried to settle into the comfort of the room, but Nadira's behavior became increasingly unusual. She avoided his gaze, sitting on the edge of the bed with her hands clenched tightly in her lap. When he approached, she stood abruptly and made her way to the bathroom, locking the door behind her. Hours passed before she emerged, her face pale and her body tense. Aariz wondered if she was simply nervous or unwell, but the unease only grew stronger as the night went on. Nadira avoided intimacy, keeping distance between them in ways that did not feel like ordinary shyness. Her silence carried the weight of something deeper, something that words could not explain. By dawn, Aariz was restless. The whispers of suspicion began to form in his mind. Why had Nadira been so secretive about her family? Why did she look terrified every time he came close? His thoughts circled in confusion, until later that day the truth began to unravel in ways he could not have imagined. Nadira spent much of the morning locked in the bathroom again, emerging only to claim she needed rest. Her avoidance was too deliberate, too heavy to ignore. Aariz's patience thinned as he struggled to understand what was happening inside his own home. Only 24 hours after a marriage that was supposed to be filled with promise. The breaking point came in the quiet of the night, when Aariz stumbled upon evidence that shattered his perception of his new bride. Whether it was through a careless mistake Nadira made, or through a moment of confrontation, the discovery left him stunned. The woman he believed he had married was not who she had claimed to be. Her identity was tangled in deception, and her presence in his house suddenly felt like a betrayal rather than a blessing. The revelation struck him not only as shocking but humiliating. To Aariz, whose pride rested on his image before his family and community, the truth felt unbearable. His disbelief quickly turned into anger. Rage took hold of him in ways he had never experienced before. In the stillness of the house, behind closed doors, that anger erupted. What had started as suspicion escalated into violence, the kind that left marks, not just on the body but on the soul. Neighbors living close by reported later that they heard noises echoing through the night. Thuds, crashes, sounds of struggle. But in societies where marital disputes are often dismissed as private matters, no one dared to interfere. The lights in the Khan household flickered as the night dragged on, each sound inside ignored by the quiet street outside. Nadira's silence, her careful attempts to hide the truth, had only fueled Aariz's fury once he uncovered it. She tried to resist, but the violence was relentless. Hours passed before the house returned to stillness. When dawn broke again, the festive air of the previous day had disappeared, replaced by a chilling atmosphere of fear and secrecy. Nadira was no longer the celebrated bride who had entered the home with blessings. She was now a victim, lying unconscious, her body bearing the marks of brutality. In less than 24 hours, the fairy tale image of a perfect marriage had been destroyed. What began with garlands, laughter and admiration had descended into horror inside the walls of the Khan household. The secrets Nadira carried had collided with the rage of a man unprepared to face deception. And in that collision, the marriage turned into a nightmare whose consequences were only beginning to unfold. The morning after the chaos in the Khan household was heavy with silence. The family, unaware of the depth of what had occurred during the night, carried on with their daily routines until they discovered Nadira lying unconscious in her room. Her face bore bruises, her wrists were swollen, and her body was limp. Panic filled the home as Ariz's relatives rushed her to the hospital. Aariz himself appeared shaken, though the anger from the night before lingered in his eyes. The carefully crafted image of a happy newlywed couple was shattered within hours, and now the focus had shifted to saving Nadira's life. At the hospital, doctors quickly realized this was not a simple case of fainting. Her injuries were consistent with repeated physical assault. She had multiple fractures, internal bleeding, and visible trauma that could not be explained away as an accident. The attending physician insisted on alerting the authorities, as the wounds clearly indicated deliberate harm. Aariz tried to downplay the situation, claiming his wife had collapsed unexpectedly, but the medical staff was not convinced. They placed Nadira under immediate care, and the hospital corridor grew tense with whispers. Within hours, the case had caught the attention of Inspector Veeraj Malhotra, a seasoned officer known for his sharp instincts and unwillingness to overlook suspicious circumstances. When Veeraj arrived, he observed the scene with a practiced eye. Nadira lay in intensive care, her body hooked to monitors, her breathing shallow but steady. Beside her bed sat a small bag retrieved from the Khan household, containing her passport and a few personal belongings. Something about the documents did not sit right with the inspector. The passport bore her name, Nadira Feroz, but certain details looked inconsistent. The photograph seemed slightly altered, the lamination imperfect, and the serial numbers mismatched when run through the database. This discovery raised questions not only about her injuries, but also about who she really was. The medical team conducted a thorough examination, and it was Dr. Sana Illyas, a forensic pathologist, brought in to assess the severity of the case, who uncovered the most startling revelation. Nadira's biological details did not align with the identity she had presented. The tests confirmed that she was not the woman she had claimed to be, and her gender identity contradicted the documents submitted at the time of her marriage. The results shocked the hospital staff, but for Sana, this was a matter of evidence rather than judgment. The truth was clear: the marriage had been built on forged papers and hidden realities. Inspector Veeraj immediately ordered a background check with the help of international authorities. What they uncovered painted an even more complex picture. Nadira's fingerprints matched records of a person in Malaysia who had previously been involved in a scandal regarding identity fraud. This individual had been under investigation for falsifying documents and disappearing before the authorities could take action. The trail led from Kuala Lumpur to several Southeast Asian countries, before abruptly ending, until resurfacing in Bengaluru, under the name of Nadira Feroz. Back at the Khan household, the family was reeling from the news. Whispers turned into arguments, and relatives who had once praised Nadira now called her an imposter. Aariz, consumed by humiliation, tried to justify his violent reaction by claiming he had been deceived. Yet, the severity of Nadira's injuries made his defense sound hollow. Inspector Veeraj noted every word, but he remained focused on building a case grounded in facts, rather than emotions. As Nadira regained partial consciousness, her condition remained fragile. She struggled to speak, her voice weak and broken. The hospital security was increased to protect her. As the case was now under public scrutiny, the media began to catch wind of the story, labeling it a shocking crime that mixed themes of deception, identity, and violence. Reporters gathered outside the hospital, eager to capture the smallest detail. What had begun as a wedding celebrated with joy had now become a national scandal, sparking debates on morality, law, and human rights. The revelation of Nadira's true identity did not change the brutality she had endured. To Inspector Veeraj, the deception was significant, but the crime of violence carried equal weight. Whether or not she had hidden her past, nothing justified the cruelty inflicted upon her. The case was no longer about a private marital dispute. It was now a high-profile investigation that threatened to expose not only Ariz's actions, but also the silence of those who may have known more than they admitted. By the end of the third day, Bengaluru was buzzing with speculation. The Khan family locked themselves indoors, avoiding the growing attention. Nadira's condition remained critical, but stable under constant monitoring. Inspector Veeraj prepared to expand the investigation into international territory, determined to uncover the full extent of Nadira's hidden past. What he did not know was that the web of lies stretched further than anyone had imagined, and every thread he pulled was about to reveal another dark truth. Inspector Veeraj Malhotra knew from the moment he examined Nadira's documents that this case would not remain confined to Bengaluru. The inconsistencies in her identity raised questions that reached beyond the walls of the Khan household. He began by tracing her movements from the time she entered India. Airport records showed that Nadira had landed in Bengaluru only weeks before the wedding, carrying a Malaysian passport that appeared legitimate on the surface. Yet when Interpol cross-checked her biometric data, the details aligned with someone who had disappeared years earlier after being accused of falsifying multiple identities in Malaysia. What had been presented as a respectable woman from overseas was, in fact, a carefully crafted illusion that spanned countries and authorities. While the investigation widened, tension grew inside the Khan family. Ariz's relatives whispered among themselves, fearful of how the scandal would tarnish their name. For them, the shame of being connected to such deception was unbearable. Aariz himself grew restless in police questioning. His anger over the betrayal was clear, but Inspector Veeraj was not swayed by his emotional outbursts. The law did not permit violence, no matter how deep the deception. Each time Aariz tried to argue that he was a victim of fraud, the inspector countered with the undeniable evidence of Nadira's brutal injuries. The case was becoming one of the most complicated he had ever handled, where questions of identity clashed with the boundaries of morality and justice. Meanwhile, Dr. Sana Illyas continued her forensic work, analyzing not just Nadira's medical condition, but also the traces of her life before arriving in Bengaluru. Inside her small bag, hidden beneath layers of fabric, Sana found scraps of old receipts and a photograph that had been partially torn. The photograph showed Nadira, or the person she was before, standing alongside unfamiliar faces in what looked like a street market in Kuala Lumpur. This small discovery suggested ties to a network of people who might have assisted her in forging documents and moving across borders. For Sana, every fragment of evidence painted a picture of someone constantly running from the truth, yet desperate to start over. The turning point came when Inspector Veeraj questioned Rehan Dastoor, Ariz's cousin. Rehan had been unusually quiet throughout the ordeal, avoiding direct questions and keeping his distance from the hospital. Under persistent interrogation, he finally revealed what he had known all along. Weeks before the wedding, he had discovered through a friend that Nadira's documents seemed suspicious. He had even overheard a phone call where she was speaking in a language he could not identify, asking someone to transfer money into an account outside India. Though alarmed, Rehan had chosen to remain silent. He admitted that he feared exposing her would ruin the marriage arrangement and bring disgrace upon the family. His silence, though rooted in fear of dishonor, had played a crucial role in allowing the deception to continue until it erupted into violence. This confession added a new layer to the investigation. Veeraj saw it as a clear example of how silence can be as dangerous as the crime itself. The family had celebrated the wedding with blind faith, ignoring signs that something was wrong. Rehan's knowledge, if shared earlier, could have prevented the tragedy that followed. Now, his omission became a burden he could not escape, and his role in the case drew scrutiny from both the authorities and his own relatives. As details of Nadira's past surfaced, the media frenzy intensified. Reports described her as a mysterious figure, a person who had lived behind multiple masks. Some painted her as a manipulator who trapped Aariz in a false marriage. Others saw her as a victim of circumstance, someone who had been forced to hide her true self in a world unwilling to accept her. Public opinion divided sharply, fueling debates that extended beyond the crime itself. Bengaluru was no longer simply witnessing a domestic dispute, but grappling with questions of identity, deception, and the boundaries of justice. Inspector Veeraj worked tirelessly to piece together the chain of events. He mapped Nadira's movements from Malaysia to India, identifying the people she may have worked with to create her new identity.
He interviewed family members who admitted that Nadira had always been guarded about her personal life, even during the short period before the wedding. Each new clue added depth to a puzzle that seemed endless. The more he uncovered, the clearer it became that this was not just about one marriage gone wrong, but about a web of lies built over years, now collapsing under its own weight. By the end of the week, the case had grown into an international scandal. Aariz, once admired for his choice of bride, now sat in custody, accused of brutality and deception of his own. Nadira remained under medical supervision, her fragile condition making it difficult to extract the full truth from her. Rehan lived under the shadow of guilt, knowing his silence had cost more than he ever intended. For Inspector Veeraj, the work was far from over. He understood that the next step, presenting the findings in court, would not only decide the fate of the accused, but also expose the uncomfortable truths society often chose to ignore. The courtroom in Bengaluru was overflowing with people the day Aariz Khan's trial began. Journalists filled the benches, their cameras flashing as they captured every moment of the proceedings. The case had become the subject of endless debates across television channels and social media platforms. It was no longer seen as just a criminal trial but as a clash of morality, culture and justice. Aariz entered the courtroom with his head lowered, dressed in plain prison attire. The once proud groom who had been admired for marrying a bride from abroad now stood accused of violence so severe that it had nearly taken a life. His family sat behind him, their faces drained of dignity, while Nadira was absent from the courtroom, her fragile condition preventing her from attending. The prosecution wasted no time in laying out the facts. They presented photographs of Nadira's injuries, medical reports detailing fractures and internal bleeding, and the testimony of Dr. Illyas, who had treated her. The evidence was damning, leaving no doubt that Aariz had brutally attacked his wife within hours of their marriage. Inspector Veeraj Malhotra, called to the stand, recounted the details of the investigation. He described the forged documents, the inconsistencies in Nadira's identity, and the confession of Rehan Dastoor, who admitted to remaining silent, despite knowing there was something unusual about her. His testimony painted a complete picture of a marriage built on deception, but destroyed by unchecked rage. Ariz's defense centered on betrayal. His lawyer argued that he was the victim of fraud, a man deceived into a marriage under false pretenses. They claimed that his violent reaction was the result of shock, humiliation, and dishonor, emotions that overwhelmed his judgment. But the judge and jury listened closely to the medical testimony that emphasized the extent of Nadira's injury. The defense's argument, though emotionally charged, could not outweigh the physical evidence of brutality. No amount of deceit, the prosecution argued, could ever justify an attempt to kill another human being. Public opinion remained deeply divided as the trial unfolded. Outside the courthouse, protesters carried placards, some demanding justice for Nadira as a victim of violence, others criticizing her for living under a false identity and deceiving her husband. Television debates became heated, with panelists arguing over whether the greater crime was the deception or the violence. The courtroom, however, remained focused on the legal facts. It was not a matter of cultural shame or emotional betrayal. It was a matter of law. The turning point of the trial came when Nadira herself appeared briefly, through a recorded video statement from her hospital bed. Weak and pale, she spoke of her desire to live a life free of fear and persecution, explaining that her decision to hide her true identity was born from desperation. Her voice trembled as she described the attack, every word echoing through the silent courtroom. For many present, her testimony shifted the perception of the case. Whatever mistakes she had made in concealing her past, she had not deserved the violence inflicted upon her. When the final arguments concluded, the judge retired to deliberate. Hours later, the verdict was delivered in a courtroom so quiet that even the sound of shuffling papers echoed loudly. Aariz was found guilty of attempted murder. The judge stated clearly that deception in marriage, while unlawful in its own right, did not grant anyone the right to commit acts of brutality. He was sentenced to a long prison term, his reputation forever destroyed. The courtroom erupted, some in relief, others in anger. Reporters rushed to file their stories, framing the verdict as a landmark in the struggle against domestic violence, and in debates about hidden identities. For Nadira, the outcome was bittersweet. Though justice had been served against Aariz, her own life remained uncertain. She was placed under state protection, her medical treatment continuing while authorities worked with international agencies to resolve her legal status. She remained a figure both pitied and criticized, a woman who had crossed borders and identities in search of belonging, but had instead found herself at the center of one of Bengaluru's darkest scandals. The Khan family retreated into silence, their once celebrated name reduced to whispers of shame in their neighborhood. Rehan, burdened with guilt for his silence, carried the weight of what might have been prevented if he had spoken sooner. Inspector Veeraj moved on to his next case, yet he knew this one would remain etched in his memory as an example of how truth, no matter how deeply buried, eventually forces its way to the surface. The story left Bengaluru haunted. What began as a wedding filled with promise had collapsed within a single day into violence, scandal, and tragedy. It became a tale retold in hushed voices, a reminder that secrets can shatter lives, and that justice, though delayed, must always prevail.